You're watching The Experience, Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
So I've told this story on the air a whole bunch of times and told it over and over and over again, but in 1963, my grandfather walked into a newsstand across the street from what would go on to become Methodist Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and picked up off the rack a book, a comic book. That comic book was called Amazing Fantasy, and it was issue number 15. And in that book, a young boy is bitten by a radioactive spider and develops the powers of a spider, and begins to call himself the Spider-Man. For those of you who are unaware, he fights crime while spinning webs and does everything that a spider can. But that started a decades and decades and decades long family collection of Spider-Man books. We have collected Spider-Man for every day of my entire life. And for, as it turns out, almost every day of my father's life. It's been a big part of our lives. It's been a big part of our family history. But recently I find myself in a situation that I never thought I would find myself in. I'm buying and collecting Spider-Man, but I'm not reading it. I can't be bothered to care. And that's true for a lot of things in the comic book business. I'm finding myself having a really hard time caring about anything coming out from any of the big three. From Marvel, from DC, or from Image. And so it got me thinking about what's it going to take to get me to care. And it's an interesting time to have this conversation because this question was just answered on a huge level for some massive characters. So we're going to get into all of that, but the real title for this show should be, frankly, my dear, I don't really give a damn. This is Devil's Advocates. What's up, the internet? It's producer Kyle.
Hey,
That
internet.
there is culturally appropriating Irishness inappropriately with the O apostrophe. Luck O the Bronze. It's Bronze Age nerd.
I'm allowed to do that. It's my people.
I understand, but like, as also an Irishman, no. It's a hyphenate.
You don't like holidays though. That's something we've established so far.
Oh, I love St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
I like St. Patrick's Day. I like Halloween. I like baseball opening day, which is my New Year's.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of holidays I do celebrate. Arbor Day is a great one. It's the Christmas holidays that I don't really enjoy.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I'm sorry to besmirch your holiday spirit there, but I don't know. I just felt a little. We're not going to be able to stream on St. Patrick's Day. We're going to miss it by one day, so I thought I should do something for it, and this is what I did.
I like any holiday where this look gets me free stuff.
Yeah.
If I wear green and a hat, I am going to eat and drink for free all day Sunday.
There we go. Yeah, it's a fun holiday, and happy St. Patrick's Day week, everybody.
Yes. So let's get into it. We're going to talk about should comics be rebooted, and I think we already have Psycho Phil in the comments, who is sort of missing what we're talking about here. Because he's talking about they reboot comics every few months with new number ones to start a new series. It doesn't work. We're not talking about when a mini series ends and a new mini series starts, which is what you're talking about. Which is the publishing practices of a lot of companies. We're talking about, when does a series need an overhaul?
Yeah, I think though that does get worked into the conversation in one aspect, which is it's a type of almost like a soft reboot that happens, and I think it can
Right.
be part of the solution that we'll get into a little bit later for how to keep continuity running for titles that should have continuity running, and conversely, how do we deal with titles that actually do need that reboot or constructive overhaul when it comes to their creative teams or their creative direction.
The way I look at the and this is part of what we're going to talk about absolutely, is the rebooting or the restarting at the end of a mini series, right? Continually running mini series, which is again what we're talking about in that case here is it's like when the McRib shows up and the McDonald's menu changes and then the McRib goes away and the Shamrock Shake shows up and then that goes away, and then the bacon double Mc whatever shows up and then that goes away. We're talking the thing isn't changing. It's just the phraseology around it is, or the packaging is. The other analogy I was going to make, and because I was working on the things I was going to compare this to when we talked about it, is places like Crumble Cookies or Insomnia Cookies. I don't know if you have those where you are.
I actually just had Crumble Cookie for the first time last week, so that's very appropriate.
Where every week is a different set of flavors. You're not really. It's still a cookie. It's still a cookie place. They're just reconfiguring the cookie in the moment, not going, okay, we're going to go from being a cookie place and we're going to rebrand to be a brownie place. So
I think actually it's an interesting example of an allegory for this, because I actually think that's where it falls apart a little bit, because when it comes to food, our palates like trying, we like our comfort foods. We like going back to those things. We like trying new things. When it comes to comic books, I would almost say that not that new things are bad, but that a little bit more consistency and solidarity with how things are working is usually in the benefit of ongoing series. To the point where I think that, and I think a lot of collectors feel that way, even if it's not 100% how I feel. I know that there is a strong group of collectors out there that wants a little bit more consistency in how titles are presented. And I think that's a great place to kind of think about this question is, should the characters that we're about to talk about or the team books be rebooted? And we are going to get into this. I do want to just point out, because I was posting it on social media earlier, we're going to give the details away later. If you came here for the day, stay tuned, be part of the chat. We're definitely going to be talking about that here later.
Throw up that hashtag, Jay. People can start getting entered.
There you go. Hashtag EXP thanks. Make sure you get the capitalization and all that stuff correct in there. And I would love to see you enter. And if you're watching, you may as well enter.
I would argue, Triple B, that Crumble Cookie is not actually good cookies. It's just fancy cookies. And
I wasn't impressed.
And where that difference, it might be difference without a distinction category for a lot of folks. But for me, they're passable cookies that are interesting to try once. I would much rather go to a Great American Cookie Company, because I think their cookies are a higher quality, or a Nestle Toll House store.
I like Mrs. Fields. I'm still a fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
Although I guess I say that I don't live near any. Maybe they're not there anymore, for all I know. I don't live near a lot of malls, which is where those are usually found.
Well, I have one mall that has a Crumble Cookie, an Insomnia Cookie, a Nestle Toll House, and a Great American Cookie Company.
Damn.
Well, I can't go there because my foot just falls off.
Right. 100%.
There's also a Godiva Chocolatiers that has cookies as well. Like, I'm a fat kid. Why you do this to me?
It's right across from the Seas Candies.
No, we don't have. There's no candy shop in there, but
Yeah,
Right.
it's one of those things, right? Like, I mean, it's all personal preference, and that's so like so many things we talk about on this show, on this channel. Definitely keep that in mind that when we're expressing our opinions, I want to hear your opinions. I know Kyle wants to hear opinions, so throw them in chat. We'd love to hear some different opinions of what we have.
Right.
But when it comes to this question of characters and titles that should be rebooted, I think it's important to kind of really think about that critically. And I think that, for me, that this is my personal barometer. I think titles and characters get rebooted too often. That's where I land on the issue. So there's my bias. You can kind of bake that into every conversation that I'm about to have. But one of the examples that we talked about before the show that we wanted to bring up was the sort of reboot that's happened with the Inner John universe over at Skybound with Robert Kirkman, leading the label there. And we knew a while ago that he was going to get the rights to do some G.I. Joe and Transformers comics. And along came this thing called Void Rivals. Along came Transformers in his line. Along came G.I. Joe. And we found out they're in a shared universe. I think a lot of fans right now, a lot of readers out there are familiar with these titles. If you're not, I recommend checking them out. For example, I actually had a delay in getting my comics for all those. So I wanted to make sure I read some of those and got caught up. They're actually pretty cheap. Like if you go to like a place like Comixology right now and you want to buy them, the first couple issues are extremely cheap, for example, if you want to get started reading. This was a reboot in a fairly strict sense, although it's funny because with G.I. Joe, it's actually not a reboot. It's a continuation of the storyline that Larry Hama has been telling. However, you have this kind of almost like a soft reboot in a sense because it's taking place in the Inner John universe. That is where it feels a little bit different. G.I. Joe and Transformers are not strangers to crossing over. They've done it in the past. That's nothing new. But I think what is different is this is capturing a lot of attention from readers. I know like copies of Void Rivals, and there's been multiple printings of Void Rivals, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, that kind of brought in Jetfire and all that stuff. Spoilers, that comic's pretty old, but I think I can talk about it at this point. So you knew that was actually part of the shared universe with Transformers and G.I. Joe. Both of those comic books, and also you have Duke and you have Cobra Commander series now. All those comic books are really doing really well, and it's capturing attention of readers, which is something that we don't see talked about very often when it comes to kind of these revamped titles. And there's some other examples out there too that we'll get to later that I think are kind of doing similar things, like with the Ultimate Comics and stuff like that. But what I think is interesting about those relaunches and those titles, as far as like why they've been successful, is they're doing a good balance of something old and something new. You have kind of this exciting new art style from Daniel Warren Johnson on Transformers, who's a longtime Transformers fan. But you're bringing in Larry Hama, who has a long history. Like Larry Hama is synonymous with G.I. Joe.
Larry Hama is G.I. Joe.
Yeah, exactly. He's in the DNA of that in an extremely real way. So I think you're kind of getting this really fresh combination. And I think that there's a lot of fans that enjoy the carryover between Transformers and G.I. Joe. And they're not like, I haven't read everything. I'm not completely caught up, but they're not meshed together to the point where it's like they may as well be, Amazing Spider-Man and Spectacular Spider-Man, where you got to read them no matter what. If you only like G.I. Joe, I think you can get away with just sticking with the G.I. Joe stuff. If you only like Transformers, you can get away with sticking with just the Transformer stuff. Who knows how that'll change as time goes on. But I do think it's been fairly successful. And I think it's a good example of something that probably did need a reboot. And it's an example of something that has been rebooted several times in the past.
Well, so I'm going to interrupt you a little bit here.
Sure, please do.
Because it's time for that portion of the show where we talk about how do we make Kyle give a damn? And because we don't really need to sell the Energon universe to people because everyone knows it's great. Right? Like everybody is aware, right, that the Energon universe has been incredibly good. But I still don't care about G.I. Joe. Right? Like the reboot of it is interesting, and it might make me pay attention a little more, but I don't care to pick up the books. Now, I'll pick up Transformers, but it's this idea of the entire process is what makes it interesting, not the reboot, right? And at the
Okay.
same time, it doesn't necessarily make you want to read it. So when we talk about the Energon universe, I think what Daniel Warren Johnson has done with Transformers is far more interesting than G.I. Joe. Because he took what had become an incredibly stale IP.
Mm-hmm.
G.I. Joe was an incredibly stale IP at IDW. And made it interesting again with Transformers. Larry Hama took what was the stale IP and just moved the stale IP to a new publisher. And it's everything else they're doing around that stale IP that's making you pay attention to it, right? It's Duke. It's the individual character books that aren't Larry Hama.
Oh, and I should mention Scarlet was just announced, by the way. That should be involved in the conversation
right.
as a new ongoing from Kelly Thompson.
Right, but so does G.I. Joe actually need still to be rebooted in the Energon for the Energon universe with some new blood telling the story?
So I think the best way to approach that is to I have two questions for you. The first question is, did the idea of G.I. Joe moving to the Energon universe, even if you're not super excited about G.I. Joe in general, is that more exciting to you than it just staying at IDW and continuing with how it was going before? Is it even slightly interesting to you that there is something going on?
If they stopped making G.I. Joe tomorrow, I wouldn't notice.
Did you ever read G.I. Joe?
Yeah, I read it a lot in the 90s and early 2000s.
Okay. So you were at the Marvels and like the Devil's Due kind of era?
Even the beginning of the IDW stuff.
Okay.
I was really into. But it's just one of those things is that it's been the same note for the last 15 years.
Yeah, and I look, I'm a massive Larry Hama fan. That I just need to say that's a disclaimer right now.
Yes, and
I think
as am I. But
the quality of G.I. Joe writing to me has fallen off, and it has for some time. Like, that's what I'll say. And I'm with you in the fact that at least, the expression of the idea that it's kind of Duke and Cobra Commander and, Scarlet coming up, those G.I. Joe titles around G.I. Joe that are more exciting. But the idea of, I'll be honest, I was not reading G.I. Joe towards the end of the IDW run, actually for a really long chunk towards the end of the IDW run. And I did start reading it again. So I think that it was successful in that respect, because I'm curious what's going on in all those titles. And I want to be caught up on them. I want to read them. I want to see where it's going as it builds towards. Well, let's see what it builds towards, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, let's see where it goes. And I'm on for that ride. And I'm similar in the fact that that's when I enjoyed G.I. Joe, late 80s, 90s, little bit into the 2000s, kind of fell off after a while. And I have to admit, I think Larry Hama's writing style, it's gotten a little too tell, don't show, or like a show, don't tell. And as far as like, it's very like jargon, same type of thing we've seen characters do before in the past, repeated. It's kind of almost become a little formulaic. The story is still moving forward. I don't want to like completely criticize the man, but I think that is something that's going on. And when it comes to Transformers, I do think that was done more elegantly, because it's a very approachable point for you to jump on if you were like a fan back in the 80s or 90s. It's a very good entry point. As far as the story, you don't really have to know, because I can tell you, I don't know the last probably 20 years of Transformers comics. Every time I picked one up, I just was like, I don't know where I'm at, what universe I'm in, what timeline, what's going on. It's been very like hard to figure that out. This felt pretty approachable to me. Like I was, like, okay, these settings, I'm not going to spoil things too much for people, but these settings are very familiar. The characters are very familiar. There's no concepts coming at you that like, I feel like you have to be deep in the lore to understand. So it's approachable from that point. And yet I think that there's still interesting enough concepts in the storytelling and the art and all that are going to keep existing Transformers fans excited as well. So I do think that's been more successful. I think you're totally right there.
Right. And that's what I'm saying is it's like it's this idea of there isn't one answer to why or when a series needs rebooted, right?
Mhm.
I think Transformers needed new blood sometime around 2007.
Yeah.
Period. I think G.I. Joe needed it probably a few years even before that.
Yeah.
In the sense of the greatest thing that could have happened for that title is for Larry Hama to go off of it for a long time, let someone else tell some stories, and then have Larry come back. Right? And kind of center it again. And I think that would have been a great use of that IP. But instead, it just keeps rolling. And so when we talk about are there too many number ones or reboots already? When we talk about a good example, even the one of the best examples going right now is only 70%, 75% of the because I'm counting 4 titles here, right? Void
Yeah.
Rivals, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and what's the other? There's another one.
Duke and Cobra Commander.
Right, the individual G.I. Joe books.
Yeah.
The only real weak one is the regular G.I. Joe. So their 75% is where it is incredible and has me interested. I will say this, and then I want to move on and talk about Ultimates a little bit, right?
Mhm.
The thing I need from the Energon universe to care is give me one story with everybody.
Yeah, and that's what I wonder if we're building towards that. I feel like we
Right.
are.
So give me a trade with Void Rivals and all of this other stuff in it that is all in chronological order that we need to have read it in to understand what's happening in the Energon universe. And then maybe I'll care about G.I. Joe again, right?
Well, let me ask you
You're
this
going to
though.
have to make me care about G.I. Joe because I care about Transformers or because I care about the individual characters in G.I. Joe, not the main story.
Let me ask you this. So what have you read from the Energon universe?
Just Transformers.
That's all you've read?
No, I read Void Rivals. Sorry.
Okay, Void Rivals and
And I'm
Transformers.
reading the individual G.I. Joe books.
Oh, okay, so you've read it all then, or you read
No,
or you read
I
the
read
beginnings, all of it.
first couple of each of them.
Okay, including like 301 and 302 of GI Joe.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no. I thought you were saying you'd only read Transformers, and it turns out you've
No,
started
I'm
at
only
least the titles.
actively reading Transformers.
Okay.
So, but here's what I'm saying. Give me one book in the chronological order you want me to read, and then let me make a decision, right? There's a great example. Dick Wolf. I don't know if you're familiar with Law and Order. But he also has this one Chicago series where it's all these shows from Chicago. And you might care about one individual story, but then it crosses over with another story. And you don't know that you care about those characters or those actors. So now you got to go watch that series. And then you've got to watch this third series. Whereas if you just give them to me as one big series with all of these people, it's going to be easier for me to determine if I'm interested in the part of it that is, like I care less about.
I think and it's not that this isn't a relevant point, but I think you're getting a little too, not too, but when you say that, you're getting into the argument of are shared continuities too big of a problem in comic books now?
Here's the example I want to give, okay? And this is what I'm talking about they need to do with G.I. Joe, Transformers, all that kind of stuff. There's one episode of these Chicago shows where so they have all the characters from all 3 Chicago shows, plus the guys from Law and Order SVU. So Ice-T is on the show. Yeah. So now I've got everybody doing one story together, and I could figure out from this one story, okay, that's a character I want to follow. So let me go find their show and watch their show.
Okay.
Right? It's, I see what they're doing with because of Duke in this story and his interaction with the other characters from the G.I. Joe book. Now I'm going to go back and pick up G.I. Joe starting at number 7 or whatever, and follow it along from there. That's what I'm getting at. Give me one unifying minute to make my decisions.
Yeah, I think it's definitely there is a conflation issue here, in my opinion, which is I think that, and it's something that, hey, here's a teaser. It's something we're going to talk about at some point on this show. There's an apathy that is involved in part of this too, that I think it's a very real part of the conversation, and it's something that we have to kind of talk about. It is part of this, but it's hard to separate sometimes. Is the apathy about the reboots themselves, or is it about comics in general? And I think that that's something that there's some crossover there, right? Like there are people that hate seeing the reboots because it's part of what happens in comic books, and they hate the state of comic books right now, or they hate parts of the state of comic books right now, or they just, again, apathy. They can't be bothered to care about certain titles, certain characters, certain situations that are going on. So I think that is kind of something that gets kind of baked into this a little bit. So
to real quick to answer this, yes, absolutely. There are still books that I care about. I'm a big fan of Borealis. I've been a big fan of The Displaced. I've been a big fan of Abbott. That's coming out from. I've been a big fan of Abbott. I've been a big fan of Dan Panosian's Alice in Wonderland stuff that he's been doing. There are certainly books that I care about, but the problem is none of the big three are doing anything that I even remotely, am following because of that level of apathy, right? Because I feel like there's been a lot of apathy towards it, and it's led it to apathy for me.
Yeah, none of like the established properties or franchises are doing books that you're like extremely interested in, right? I guess is Transformers an exception?
And Transformers is, I'm going to tell you, it's because my brother-in-law and my 3-year-old nephew are also reading it.
Okay.
Like, I'm interested to be reading it so that when Jackson comes up to me with a Transformers book and goes, Uncle Kyle, read.
Yeah.
I kind of know what I'm walking into.
Right.
But it's the excitement that he has for it that has given me the excitement for that book.
I gotcha.
And we need to take a break here in a second, but I wanted to hit on the Ultimates stuff that's been happening with Marvel. And how, while that seems to be working for a lot of the community, it missed me completely.
Same. I haven't read any of it.
Yeah, and I'll be honest. I'll wait for a trade. I'll pick up a trade.
Yep.
And I'll see. But the thing that's different about that is that they're taking a character that has, again, gotten stale, that has kind of been established, has kind of been dry, and essentially going back to the last time it worked.
Mm-hmm.
When they ended the Ultimate Universe, Ultimate Spider-Man was this incredible book that every week you had to run out and get. Every time it released, it was killing it. And so there's this idea of going back to the last thing that worked. The last time I remember going, God, I'm so excited for this book.
Yeah.
Has created a lot of interest in me for that book. So that's an example of something relatively minor in terms of just how you present your story that can work. You don't have to change creative teams, change publishers, change shared universes, change any of that crap. You can kind of just revert back to what used to be good. And my memory of what used to be good is enough to pull me in, right?
But at the same time, it is a different kind of reboot, because you're basically, and this is something when we talk about what can or should be done about this, the Ultimates idea, even if the Ultimates right now isn't speaking to me because I'm not running out and buying it, I will check it out. I will read it. I'm with you. I want to kind of see a volume 1 from each of the major titles, kind of go in and read them. That, like you're talking about the Energon universe, that's what I want to do with the Ultimates. Ultimate stuff, I should say, the new Ultimate stuff. But here's the thing. The idea of taking part of your characters and plopping them in a new universe and saying this is that type of a reboot where it's just here, we don't have to be bogged down by continuity that's happened for, you know, X number of years in our company. Let's go ahead and just have this new universe to play around in where we can screw things up and we can create new things and try new things, or you know, go back to basics with some characters that need that. I think that's a good solution to a lot of these problems, is don't mess with your main, you know, Spider-Man book, but go ahead and start a different Spider-Man. And if people like it, they'll buy it. If they don't, they won't. And that's one way to kind of deal with that. And you can kind of, you know, maybe you can take some examples from that in your main Spider-Man series. And I don't think Spider-Man is necessarily the best example of that, but I think it's the most popular example.
Right. But I mean, even the Black Panther book doing so well.
Yeah.
In the Ultimate Universe. And now there's other Ultimates coming that are generating a lot of interest. And again, I think it's this kind of return to a thing that was a high point for the publisher, right? It's Ultimates Comics, especially when Bendis was doing them, was running it, was such a high point for Marvel that returning there with your current crop of talent and letting them play sort of in that world, even though it isn't a direct reboot, it's a kind of a reconfiguration, is a really good way to go, hey, remember this? Over here, remember? And then, you know, you go back to it.
Let me ask the chat this, though, real fast. I think this is an important question because this is something I suspect is going on with the Ultimate books. This is a very small sample size, but in chat, are you reading Ultimates and are you enjoying it? Just say liking Ultimates or enjoying Ultimates. Or are some of you just buying it because Spider-Man sold out and all the Ultimate titles have been selling out and there's a little bit of speculation value involved there?
Right. If you're that guy, put "I'm wrong" in the chat.
Well,
I'm kidding.
And that's definitely going to be Kyle's opinion about it. And I can kind of, by the way, I kind of agree because I don't think it's good spec.
Right. No, I traded 2 Comics Pro exclusive Ultimate Spider-Mans to my local comic shop today for a Neil Gaiman hardcover I wanted. Like, you're not wrong if you're buying it because you think it's going to be valuable. I think it's good money after bad long term.
Yeah.
But
sell it quick.
any reason to tell Marvel to keep doing this thing that, based on my read of it, is good, then I'm good with. Okay,
and I'm getting some results, and that's great. Reading and enjoying, that's awesome. And yeah, I've heard good things about Spider-Man. I think that's what, to me, that's what I see happening. I see Ultimate Spider-Man did well because people liked it. There you go. There you go.
Right here is the only one I bought. Ultimate X-Men 1 is the only one I picked up.
I'm curious. That's the Peach Momoko one, right?
Yeah, I missed, and part of this is I would be doing the Spider-Man one, but I missed number 1, and I'm not paying spec-a-douche markup prices, and I don't want a second printing, so I'm going to wait for a trade. Black Panther is a book I would probably enjoy, but it's not a book I would have bought anyway, so I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, it's something I'll check out later when I can borrow a copy from somebody or, you know, something like that. So it's one of those kind of things, but I think the Ultimate Universe is a great example of a good way to do it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree. And that's even without me having been the person, you know, reading it yet. But here's look, this is another thing for me. When it comes to Marvel stuff, I do Marvel Unlimited. I am way more likely to wait and just read everything on Marvel Unlimited. I don't mind being 5 months behind, 6 months behind to read stuff. So that plays into it big time for me. I don't think it should be affected in like me saying like, I didn't think it was good enough to buy. If I was reading titles on a monthly basis, I probably would have wanted to, you know, at least check out the number 1s for everything and see how they were turning out and keep going from there. Now I can, like, you know, I pay 1 fee a month and I can basically read it all once it hits the platform. So
right. We are way over our break time. So let's do this. Let's get to a break because Bronze is losing his vertical hold. And when we come back, we're going to get into some of the other sides to this, and I'm going to address Derek Neiman directly when we come out of the break. So we will see everybody in just a second here on Devil's Advocates.
There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit comicshoplocator.com to find a store near you.
My name is Mark Weiss, and I am the founder and president of an organization called Comic Books for Kids. 6 years ago this month, we embarked on a journey of passion and heart. Our goal was to make a difference for children in hospitals and cancer centers. We want to thank our friends for allowing us their support and for providing us with the means to make so many happy with their gracious give to us.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Devil's Advocates. I want to take a second and, thank everybody for coming out. Reminder, Jay, throw that beautiful bean footage up here. Hashtag EXP thanks to get entered for our giveaway. It is an Art Adams ratio variant for a Marvel book, so make sure you're getting entered for that. Hashtag EXP thanks. I want to, Headless Hammerhead's Guide to Comics More. Comic Books for Kid is an awesome organization. We're going to be doing more with them as time goes on, but we're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to do what we're going to do. I wanted to address some of the comments. We've got a ton of great comments here in the chat.
Yeah.
So I want to get on that. First of all, the idea of a shared universe is great. I'm a big fan of shared universe. Ghost Machine is a great example. Different than the shared universes we're talking about, but it is a great example. And it's something we can bring up, mainly just because most of that IP is new IP, not established IP, with the exception of Geiger.
That's a really good point, though, too, because new shared universes tend to be like, look at Radiant Black's universe or something like that. Like, they tend to be able to, they got such a leg up because they're starting from the beginning.
Right. You're not trying to push existing IP into them. I wanted to mention Derek's comment here. Waiting for a trade is such a catch-22 because if publishers don't see sales for individual issues, they might kill it. But we don't want to get individual issues unless it's actually good. So what Derek has fallen into here on some level is a wild misconception that's very common in comics. So what most folks don't think about is the publishers don't actually know how many books readers are buying. The publishers don't get end user data. All they see is what's selling to local comic shops, right? So if local comic shops are ordering these books, they're going to see those sales, even if local comic shops are sitting on the books the same way the speculators are, right? Or even if local comic shops are having to throw these things in dollar bins for 2 years. That's the only data the publisher sees. So when we talk about waiting for a trade, the publisher takes all of that into consideration too, because again, all they're seeing is what's being ordered by LCSs. So if a thing like the Ultimate Universe is selling pretty well at an LCS, those LCS orders are going to keep coming in and they're going to see those sales figures. But waiting for a trade just adds on to those sales figures and doesn't necessarily detract from.
But there's another part of this though, where like, let's say you and me both went to the same LCS and we both decided that we're going to pre-order all the Energon books through FOC. That does increase the LCS's order from the publisher. And not doing that, may not. Well, it would contribute if enough people did it.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying is that what you don't know is how many people at your LCS are buying this book, and neither do the publishers. So it's this idea of if enough people show up to an LCS, it forces them to raise their orders. But so many LCSs these days, because of the way the economy is, are just ordering to sell out. They're ordering the exact number of books that their pre-orders are for, or they're ordering the exact number of books plus what they normally sell off the wall in a week. So even if we did go to our LCS and pre-order, it probably wouldn't increase that number all that dramatically. It would
No,
be
I mean, I just think that like
marginal
you,
increases.
I think you're 100% correct in that. I just also think that there is something to be said for if a LCS suddenly saw like a 300 or 3,000% increase in demand for a title, they'd probably order a little heavier on it just to make sure that they have. I mean, we don't know, but there's a really good likelihood they might.
But a lot of LCSs wouldn't. And
Yeah.
the reason they wouldn't is because if you see that kind of increase, it's usually anomalous, and that's when you get burned.
Yeah, that's true
So
too.
they're going to make you prepay for those things so that they don't get burned, or they're going to be more conservative than even their numbers are telling them they should, because again, this is how you get burned. What Rob is saying here, an A to B to C business and publishers only care about B. It's not true. They do care about C, but they don't get any information about C. And in a show Bronze and I are going to be doing later, we're going to talk about this a little bit more and this data issue and the problems with data in comics. So, well, that was a free
episode of our show, by the way. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that's sort of a convoluted answer to a not super convoluted question. But it's an important thing to remember that publishers don't count the same way we do. So,
yeah.
So we wanted to kind of get into like what can work when you're rebooting a franchise. And like I said, guys, if you see us hitting star or marking your comments, data.
I mean, that might be a fun one.
We're gonna walk away because there's a joke there, but I'm not. Anyway. If you see us star in your comments, whatever, we're gonna come back to those in the final segment of the show. So just know we're gonna get to you. Stick around, and we will get there.
Yeah.
It happens with a lot of books. LCS is ordered to get the ratios, but are stuck with a ton of the regular title stuff. It's why ratios are killing comics. It's why variants are bad. It's why people who buy ratios are killing comics. It's a whole vicious cycle. But we'll talk about that because even I buy ratios, so it's a problem for everybody.
Some of them are pretty nice. I like Art Adams ratios.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think ratios are bad for the business, but they're great for the collector. So it's this kind of weird catch-22 there. So, what are some things that can work when you're doing a reboot that can really kind of drive readers back into the arms of a character, as it were? And one of the things we kind of mentioned in the last segment, but I want to go back to it. I'm part of the problem, certainly, Derek. Like I said, I think it's great for the collector, but it's bad for the business, and so it's trying to find that fine line to walk, right?
We did cover that in a previous episode too. If after the show, if you want to go back and watch that, definitely check it out.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What we kind of talked about is the idea of getting back to the basics, right? Getting back to working with. I just have Taylor Swift stuck in my head, and I'm the problem. It's me. Anyway, and Bronze, your vertical hold's going again.
Okay, I'm gonna drop out for 1 second. Be right back.
Yep. All right, so I will talk about this for a minute while we wait for him to reboot his camera there. But one of the things is going back to the basics, going back to the last thing that worked, right? A great example of this from the history of comics, and I hate that this is the example I'm going to use because I think the situation around it is bull. But it's Thor. There was a period where they had put Thor mantle on Jane Foster, and she was carrying the hammer and all this kind of stuff, and it really wasn't working. Right? People were not digging it the way they thought they would. And so they rebooted to the last thing that worked before, and that actually wound up getting us like the God Butcher and some of this kind of stuff that wound up being really good in Thor. Going back to what you know works is always a good way to reboot a series. a rebooted character. Like, we're not even necessarily talking about a series here, right? We're talking about a character.
Yeah.
Because again, like we talked about, is that it's not necessarily, when you have a mini series end and another mini series start or a new number one. We're talking about reinvention, recreation, rebranding, repackaging, whatever. So, can you think of some examples, Bronze, of where stories have kind of gone back to uh, almost like rebooting in safe mode, like gone back to a place where everything kind of worked and starting over and branching out from there?
I mean, we it's not a new example, but the one that jumps to mind is the Transformers reboot that we just saw, because that feels very much like a, hey, this is a safe type of reboot to me. That's a good one. I hadn't really thought about that. Ones that had done that successfully already. I was so focused on the
Well,
ones that need to, or should, or shouldn't, basically.
I think about some of the stuff they've done with Spider-Man, where they've sort of retconned things by bringing characters over from other timelines. It's getting Gwen Stacy back, or after they killed Mary Jane, bringing Mary Jane back because it's Mary Jane from another timeline. Kind of getting back to a reset position, and then telling a story from there. Whereas, like, again, with the Ultimates or with the Energon, we're changing so much. We're not getting there, but Ultimates is a lot closer, I
Okay.
think.
So an example of that I can think of is kind of like what happened around the New 52 relaunch of Batman, for example.
The button.
Yeah.
Well, when the buttons came out, right? When
Yeah.
That kind of got you right back to Flashpoint, which was one of the last big things that had worked as a crossover event.
Yeah.
And it brought the Watchmen in, which was a big deal. So, like, the button was a good example. Or, yeah, the New 52 was a great example. And then even Rebirth from there.
Actually, oddly enough, Rebirth is what I meant. I actually said New 52 by mistake. I kind of conflate those two because of how tied they are to each other. And actually, this is kind of a good point to say. I think DC almost kind of does this better than Marvel, although they maybe do it too often. But they definitely have a return to center, return to norm kind of soft reboot like you're talking about, or a safe mode reboot.
52 gave you a lot of that. Crisis gave you a lot of that.
Yeah.
DC tends to, when they do these big events, right, they're going to bring the whole world crashing down so they could start it over, which is a great way to do it, right? Like, DC has such major characters that can do that, and Marvel has kind of ruined Galactus for the same purpose, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, the Infinity kind of did that a little bit without, like, because the titles weren't vastly different, but yet they kind of cleaned up some of their multiverse stuff that way by combining storylines and kind of resetting, some of the fringe stuff, but not necessarily. The main books were kind of more or less the same.
What about Black Widow coming back in Venom 26? Does that count? I'm not sure. I'm not sure either. I'll be honest. I didn't read Venom that long. I got to about the 4th issue of that Venom run and went, nope.
That's where I noped out of it too. That's funny.
So,
like space Venom, right?
Yeah. Well, basically every Venom since the late 90s. That's
but by the way, there's a character that I would love to see get rebooted back to their kind of anti-hero roots. Venom.
Yep.
Wolverine's another one for me, by the way. Little bonus hit there.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think that we need to kind of talk about, and we're definitely going long. So, Bronze's wife, don't murder me.
We got a little time. I could go like 10, 15 minutes over maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect. Part of the problem I think that exists and why people nope out of comics, right? Why people stop caring about comics is that the conversation sucks the fun out of it. And what I mean by that, and it's actually the note we wrote, is that for so long around Spider-Man, all we did was hear people bitch about Dan Slott, and then about Chip Zdarsky, and then about Zeb Wells, and then about and then and all of a sudden, even if you're enjoying Spider-Man, everywhere you turn, people are telling you you're wrong for enjoying Spider-Man. And it's really easy to stop liking something because people tell you it's stupid or because people tell you you're wrong.
Can I give you a great example of that real fast with Spider-Man? So for me, I started enjoying, and I know the very end of J. Michael Straczynski's run is very controversial. I understand. I'm talking about the beginning of his run. I jumped into Spider-Man because I was such a fan of Babylon 5 that I wanted to see what, and also other J. Michael Straczynski stuff, that I wanted to see what he was going to do with Spider-Man. And I started enjoying Spider-Man for the first time since I was reading it back in the early 90s when he was kind of, telling the story there. And I really dug that. But then I would go to an LCS or something and I hear people complaining about, oh, J. Michael Straczynski, like it's ruining, there's too much going on with the totems and it's ruining Spider-Man. And it kind of spoils some of your enjoyment, some of your fun, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the example I was going to give is that thing where you grow up and you're young and you're into pro wrestling, and then you get older and your friend's like, that's stupid. Why are you still into pro wrestling? Yada, yada, yada. Because, you know, it's fake or whatever, all of those things that kids say that, and they suck the fun out of this thing you really enjoyed. Right? It's what anybody who grew up a nerd in the 90s experienced with comic books.
Yeah.
Or Pokemon cards or Magic the Gathering. Right? It's the more people bitch about the thing you enjoy, the less likely you are to enjoy it. And I think a big part of going to conversation or changing the conversation about this and when should characters be rebooted and what should characters be rebooted, we also need to reboot the conversation. We got to stop yucking other people's yums. I can't tell if Bronze is froze or if he's just deep in thought.
No, I was reading chat. Just reading chat. Sorry.
Even your eyes weren't moving, and I was freaking out, man.
No, I was reading Psycho. I was reading Derek and then Psycho Phil's comment. They're a little bit on the longer side, so I was checking those out.
Right. So I was actually going to come back to Derek's, which is when they constantly reboot and retcon, there are no stakes for the characters. Again, we're not talking about a mini series ending and another mini series starting. We kind of are, but we're not entirely. We're talking about rebooting an entire character. What does it take to make you care about Spider-Man? Well, if you're just do a 6-issue run after 6-issue run after 6-issue run, right, there's no stakes for the character. But at the same time, there are bigger fundamental problems here than just that.
Yeah.
There has been no new blood put into this for so long.
What I want to, so Headless Hammerhead followed up to Derek's comment saying that was the problem with Krakoa. And so I am the X-Men are my jam. G.I. Joe's like my second jam. X-Men's my number one jam. And I will say that Krakoa was actually, in my opinion, an example of a good reboot because it injected something completely original and new into the X family. We got something different. Now, did it get a little long in the teeth? Did it suffer some of the problems that you're talking about, Headless, with, kind of the stakes and everything because of the resurrection and all that? Yeah, you can get into all that. But I'm still, I read behind on everything. I'm still reading through all the X-Men stuff, and I'm still, trudging through all the different Fall of X, Fallout, all those things. So that's something that got me reading X-Men on a monthly basis for pretty much all the main titles in a way that I hadn't for years, and really enjoyed it. And a lot of it's credit to Hickman's kind of vision for that. And I think that's something that you'll see over and over again. We talked about God Butcher, Jason Aaron on Thor. If a good creator comes on a title with original ideas and wants to reboot them, I think that's where you're going to get the more successful reboots. If not even just a good creator, but if a good creator who is on their game wants to come into a title and has an idea, and they're given this is the important part. They're given creative reign to do something different, to do something a little out there. Like Krakoa is a little out there. It is one of the more bizarre things you could do with the X-Men besides putting them in space and stuff over and over again. So I think
Jonathan Hickman's takeover of the X-Men is a great example of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
That was a new number one. It was an end of a series, But there was more to it than just that. They added a new creative driver. They added all of this kind of stuff that Browns was talking about. And so it's a prime example of some people hated it. But for the first time in a long time, there was genuine new interest in X-Men.
Yeah.
And even if you didn't like it, there was genuinely new interest in X-Men.
And like, I totally understand, Leonard, like everybody's free to their opinion on this. And I get, like I even said, I think it got a little long in the tooth, but I think that they told some unique stories and they used some of that in very interesting ways. And again, I don't want to get into too much of the weeds of that and spoilers and that kind of stuff, but they did play around with the idea of what was possible and wasn't possible with Resurrection and it going away and there being caveats. And, you know, even them doing stuff with Miss Marvel later on, like there's a whole bunch of stuff there. There's a lot of meat to them bones.
Right. Absolutely. So, do you consider what they did with the Punisher a reboot? Completely trashed the original character, removed him, and replaced him. Then canceled the replacement after 4 issues. Yes, I do consider it a reboot, but not a true reboot. It's a new character creation.
Yeah.
It's a new carrier of the mantle. Not really a reboot. It's the same thing that they tried to do with Thor when they made her a woman, right? It's the same character being carried out by a different person, right? The mantle being carried by a different person.
If anything, they almost did the Punisher reboot before that with the whole hand thing.
Right.
That's kind of more of a reboot in some ways.
I think the brilliance of it is that it sort of reclaimed the Punisher for Marvel and took it away from the horrible, horrible, horrible people who had been kind of co-opting that character for so many years because they hated it. So now it's kind of easier to see that distinction. And while they did kill the series after 4 issues, it doesn't mean that the work isn't done. Right? I think Punisher was one of those characters that desperately needed rebooted because so many people had bastardized what the character was that it no longer represented what the character was. So the idea that Punisher wasn't a reboot, it was karaoke, is kind of right, but mostly wrong because at some point, even Superman had to stop being Superman for a minute. Even Captain America had to stop being Captain America for a minute because we bastardized who those characters were and we'd gotten away from what they were supposed to be.
Well, and you really see that, you know, I mentioned the 2 examples I mentioned earlier, Wolverine and Wolverine and Venom. Add in Punisher, and you start to see a trend there. There are other characters like Captain America, stuff you're talking about. All these characters, though, that are anti-heroes, that are the bad boys of Marvel back from the 90s or whatever that we think about in the 80s and all that stuff. The problem is you can only go so far once you start having Venom have his own title, with him being a true villain who dives into anti-hero territory before you kind of have to go all the way over to hero. And that's fine from a story perspective, but this to me gets to the meat of the question of where can you successfully do a reboot? It's when you've gone full circle through that, and that has kind of started, you've told the stories that you can tell with Venom as a hero, then you can kind of pull it back. And, you know, if you don't think Venom's a great example, think about Punisher. Punisher's a really good example because Punisher, you can go a new direction with him, but eventually a lot of people are going to want the Punisher out there that's, you know, trying to take down Wolverine because he's gone too far, right? Like, that's a very dark story. You're talking about Punisher trying to teach Wolverine a lesson by blowing him up in a mall or whatever that one story is that where that happened. But that's a very tough story to tell today.
For most of the lives of those characters, they've showed up, they've caused havoc, and they've left. So they've not needed rebooted or changed because we haven't tired them out. But when they start making their own books because, well, people really like Venom, you know what? You know what happens when you do something all the time? It's not special anymore.
Yeah.
If you went to Disney World every day, going to Disney World wouldn't be special. Right? They're going to open my favorite restaurant, not 150 yards from my office. I'm going to want to go there every day, but if I go there every day, it won't be special. So you gotta remember that the things we ask them, the things we tell them we want, are actually the reason these things have to be rebooted, because we get what we want and then we get tired of it and now it doesn't work anymore. So we need to take our second break. We're already long. But when we come back, we're going to address most of your comments and a lot of the other stuff. Plus, we're going to do the giveaways. So during the break, hashtag EXP thanks in the chat. And we will get to your comments when we get back.
Did you know that every experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out. Twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I am producer Kyle. That is Seamus O'Brien's.
Top of the morning to you.
Oh, now that was definitely racist.
My race.
Even though it's right. Anyway. We are going to take this last segment here. We've got a few minutes. We want to hit some of your comments. There were a lot of great ones, and we're not gonna be able to get to all of them here in the show. So we just want to hit some of them. I do want to start with something from very early in the show, though.
Please do.
Don't mind, Bronze.
Yeah, go for it.
It's hard to get excited when they are in your face with the next big book every week. It's true.
Yeah.
This is a problem, right? It's the way comic books are marketed contributes to this issue.
Yeah.
Oh, the next big thing from Dynamite Comics is yet another Vampirella. It could be, but it could also just be more Vampirella. But if you put it that way, how is anybody going to know and therefore get excited?
Yeah.
It's
a solicitation problem for sure.
Right. Magic the Gathering is a great example of why a story doesn't need to be rebooted, because every time they release a new set of cards, it's like releasing your favorite characters in a new landscape. I don't necessarily buy that last part, but it's every time they release a new set of cards, the mythos expands. Right? It's when you go back to Ravnica, you get new Ravnica mythos. So rather than telling the same story where everybody is, in, I don't know, one of the universes in Magic forever, the mythos expands because they do keep going to different places. Bronze, what are you thinking?
Let's see if there's any other comments here that I wanted to make sure we got to. We did get to a lot of them, which, by the way, everyone out there, thank you very much for your comments. We really do appreciate that as we're talking here. We love to see everybody getting into it. Stevie B said, looking back at the state of DC Comics when they produced the new 52 and Rebirth, though there were some hiccups along the way, the talent existed there both editorially and creatively, not so today. Good.
I want to, before we get into this comment, I want to challenge something that Stevie B has put here. The not so today is incredibly diminishing of the great work that so many great people are doing at DC.
Yeah.
The talent is there, both editorially and creatively. The difference, I would say, now is financial.
Maybe you could make the argument, though, that the editorial direction of the cohesive DC universe is not maybe up to snuff with what it's been through some of those revamps they've done in more successful times. I think that part of that I can kind of agree with it. And again, it is very subjective as far as that goes, and it doesn't do anything to dismiss some of the great work that is still happening.
Right. But again, that comes a lot of it from the financial driven
Sure.
decisions being made by the new overlords over DC, not at DC, above DC. And the same at Marvel. Like on some
Yeah.
level, what Bob Iger or whoever is at Disney decides is the course of Disney is going to affect Marvel whether they want it to or not.
But it's all a web, right? Like it's all connected
Yeah.
in on some level. So I think that's it's still
Right.
valid.
So, like I said, I don't want to let anybody diminish the good work that creators are doing or editors are doing at these companies just because we don't feel like they could carry something like that. They certainly could. But the question is would they be allowed to do it the way they need to do it? And that's where the question falls.
And Derek, I think that you're kind of going back to the conversation we were having about. Oh, that time I think my camera did freeze.
Yeah, you're super froze. Your vertical hold is fine, but you're frozen.
How about that? There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Hey. I'm having a problem with my cam link, which connects to my stuff. I'll try to get it fixed by next week, everybody. Yeah, but I think that when it comes to the question there of should characters go back to their roots, I think it's kind of tied into that. There's a lot of people that want to see more of that grittier Wolverine, and the times that we did get to see that, like in Logan in the movie, a lot of people suddenly were a little bit more tuned in because they finally unleashed a little bit of the story there when it comes to the violence and kind of things that Wolverine's more known for. There's a lot of other factors too, but I think that was something that's a good example of that. And when you talk about some of these characters like Venom and Punisher, that's something that gets wrapped up into it. And then the one thing this is a really great comment on some level, because we didn't have internet and all these people were trying to tell you your opinion for you. If you enjoyed something, you enjoyed it. And that's true. It is kind of like this. If you get too focused on what everybody thinks about the zeitgeist of what comics are, or what the X-Men are, or what Batman is, or what's going on with politics and comics, or whatever kind of things you want to put into it, everybody's got these opinions out there now. And no matter what it is, no matter if you like it, love it, hate it, whatever your opinion is, there's a large vocal group of people that have the exact opposite opinion out there that want to make their opinion known. And I think that that's something to be said for just choosing how you engage in social media and conversations about comics in a way that is healthy and productive for you to still enjoy them, which is a very delicate balancing act.
All right. Real quick, Frog Brawler, that is a whole other episode of Bill Nye the Science Guy, or Producer Kyle, the guy who talks about cameras and makes everyone really bored. When we have that conversation, if you've ever watched What We Do in the Shadows, I Will Become an Energy Vampire, where it's just going to be so boring to everyone that they'll want to die.
Should be our next giveaway hashtag for a future show right there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess final thoughts on this deal, on this kind of topic of when should comic books be rebooted? Do they need to be, and how should they be? The answer is that, yes, I agree that there are too many short run miniseries printings happening with new number ones and that, but that's going to continue to be the case so long as the current business model of comics exists the way it is, where number ones sell 300% better than number threes. Period. Number ones sell 300% better than number threes. So you take your number one and you cut that by half, and that's how many people buy number two. Cut that again in half, and that's how many people buy number three. Right? You're by the time you get to the third issue, these companies are going, well, our numbers are decreasing so fast, we have to put out a new number one so that people jump back in. That's a problem, for sure. But I think a bigger part of that problem is that people buy a new number one and realize that nothing has changed. That there's nothing here that's of interest. They had fallen off of the end of the last series. They see a new series is starting and they want to try it again. And then they realize that it's the same thing they were reading before they fell off. It's just got a number one on the cover.
It's smoke and mirrors to a large extent.
Right. If these companies were actually trying something, they were actually getting back to what worked last or what's good.
Or a bold new direction even.
Right. or a bold new direction,
as long as it works.
right, then you would see these numbers sustain. Because go back to Ultimates. Ultimates, the number 2s of Ultimates are selling only at about 10% off of number 1s. The number 3s are only about 10% off of number 2s. That is a massive difference, right, than what you traditionally see. So I think that kind of idea is super important to when do you reboot and how do you reboot. That's the business model to sort of follow, right?
Yeah. For me, I think that the the cliche in comic books, it's a good one and it's very appropriate. I think Spider-Man is a character that's kind of at the core of this. With great power comes great responsibility. And rebooting is a great power. And it's something that needs to be used in comics when you get bogged down by decades of continuity, missteps, things that have happened, power creep. I was talking about Wolverine earlier. There's a great example of power creep. He went from being somebody who could heal a broken leg in a couple days to being somebody who could heal a broken leg in a couple minutes, right? Like that's some serious power creep, and it changes how a character is in the universe. And maybe some creators want to change that, or they want to reboot that, or they want to reboot Spider-Man and have it go back to basics and have it just be a teenager, out there swinging webs. However you want to do it, it's a meritocracy. As long as you're going to do it well and tell good stories, as long as story and success in that story is the driving factor, I think that it's a noble pursuit. I think that it's overused. I think it's an often used parachute that publishers want to break out when things start to look a little murky or when sales start to slump. And that could be in everything from the rebooting, like the miniseries style, to the soft reboots, to the changing up a character, to the full-on event reboots. I think that it just needs to be used more sparingly, with more control and more precision. And if you do that with more care and more consideration in the reboots, it's something that can continue to be very successful. It's not going away. We're still going to see more reboots as time goes on. We might see more reboots over the next few years. Especially with, kind of new waves of cinema coming, like say for the MCU and then also for DC, that might inspire some more reboots that kind of coincide with that, as you start to see new readers come in or new reader interest come in. Something we've seen before. So I'm curious to see how it goes, but I just would caution the creative forces, the editorial, the publishers, the financial behind all those, to really make sure that they're doing it for a reason that is calculated, not just because we can.
Right. Real quick, Stevie B, I know you weren't trying to diminish anybody there, but by saying what you're saying in the second part of your sentence, that's exactly what's happening. The talent level there is not any less. In fact, John Romita's work there was not peak John Romita. Jim Lee hasn't been Jim Lee in 10 years. Like, it's this thing of, you have to remember that even if you put the greatest artists to ever live there, they're still going to be controlled by what Warner Discovery wants them to do and tells their editorial to do. Doesn't mean that the talent isn't there. It just means that the thing that they're trying to do, they're being held back from. So, all right. Last chance to get hashtag the EXP thanks in the comments. I'm going to count to 30. And at the end of that 30 count, if you're not in, you're out. Jay will throw a link up in the chat for you to fill out if your name is the name drawn, so that we can ship you out the book. If you've won anything on the EXP in the last month, you are ineligible. If anyone else in your household has won anything in the last month, you are ineligible. One per household, one per person. And you have 24 hours to fill out the link. If you don't get that link filled out in 24 hours, I'm giving your book away again. Just know. So please, please, please fill out the link. Jay, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and let's roll this. Let's roll it.
Okay, real quick before I do, I've said this on every show. I'm going to continue to say it. Thank you all. Y'all are the reason we get to do this. We appreciate every one of you. That includes the shows on here. Bronze, it's been awesome having you. And Kyle's the heart of this thing. So without further babbling, let me go
Let's
ahead.
just give the book away.
Let's go see. Okay, I got you, Kyle.
Like, don't make me dock your pay for keeping me away from dinner.
The heart is hungry. Leonard, congratulations.
All right. Absolutely, Leonard. Fill out the form. You have 24 hours. Thank you to Dynamic Forces for providing us with the giveaway. You just won an Alpha Flight number 1 in 50 by Arthur Adams. That's the cover right there on the cover on the screen there. So make sure you get that filled out, Leonard. Congratulations. All right. So next week, Bronze now will be back with another topic. I think I have an idea for our topic for next week that I'm going to run by him. And we will, be back next week talking about a whole nother thing. In the meantime, here on The Experience, tomorrow night, starting at 7 o'clock Eastern, myself, Jay, and Miss Jen will be doing Minute to Skim It, which are comic book reviews. Then you have Mint Hunter Comics, which is a comic sale, and Kicking It with Henri. That's Henri with an O, not Henri with an H, because why? I don't know.
Same.
Right. Then Wednesday, you've got Dynamic Forces comic collectibles with Rex. You've got 360 Comics. You've got Triple T with Chuck. Thursday, you've got What's in the Box with Miss Jen, the news with Dan. You've got the Geek Chat, which is a great show. If you're not watching it, it's a great show. And then head into Sketch Up with Mel and Mog. Friday, Nick will be back. He'll have Joe Quesada art on the art show Friday. Joe Quesada art on the art show. That's cool. Friday. Yes. So Nick's original art show is 7 o'clock Friday. Nancy McCann is 9 o'clock Friday. Jam Comics is our morning show on Thursdays, 11 o'clock on Thursdays, and 7:30 p.m. on Saturdays. And then Sundays is Fat Jacks. So for Jay and Bronze, I've been producer Kyle. Congratulations to Leonard. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Hit like, hit subscribe, send us money if you want.
Become a member.
Visit our website, theexplive.com. And we will see everybody next time.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.